I never meant to hack the Vatican. That's not how this started. My name is Kelly Brennan. I fix computers for a living. When your hard drive dies and you lose all your photos, I'm the person who gets them back. I work out of a strip mall in Phoenix. It's not fancy, but it pays the bills. The Vatican job came from Father Kowalski at Sacred Heart Church. I'd helped his diocese before when hackers locked up their computers. He called me on a Tuesday. "Kelly, I have someone who needs your help. Very quiet work." "How quiet?" "The kind where you don't ask questions." I should have said no, but my rent was due and I had $47 in my bank account. "What's the job?" "Getting data off some damaged hard drives. Someone will bring them today. Cash payment, double your normal rate." The someone was a woman in an expensive gray suit. She carried a metal briefcase and talked like she went to fancy schools. "Father Kowalski said you were good," she said. Her name was Ms. Patterson. "Depends what you need." She opened the briefcase. 6 hard drives sat inside, all torn up like someone had hit them with a hammer. The metal was dented. The circuit boards melted. Everything broken. "Can you get data off these?" I picked one up and looked at it under my magnifying glass. Damaged, but maybe not dead. "Maybe." "What happened?" "Fire damage. Electrical problem at the building where they were stored." That was bullshit. Nobody pays double rates for fire damage, and these drives looked like someone tried to destroy them on purpose. "What kind of data?" "Office stuff. Employee files. Nothing important." Another lie. But $47 meant I couldn't be picky. $200 per drive, half now. She pulled out an envelope with exactly $600 cash. New bills, never folded. "How long?" "1 week." She left without giving me her phone number or address. No paperwork, no receipt. The kind of deal that meant trouble. I spent 3 days taking the drives apart in my clean room. 4 were readable, 1 was half dead, 1 was completely fried. Not bad for drives someone had tried to wreck. Getting data off damaged drives is like putting together a puzzle with missing pieces. You find what you can, guess at the rest. Most of the files were normal office stuff like Ms. Patterson said. Employee records, budgets, schedules. Then I found the folder that changed everything. It was labeled Site Management and contained files with names like containment protocols and termination procedures. The kind of words that made my stomach hurt. The first file was a spreadsheet listing locations around the world. Not regular addresses, but coordinates and code names. Site 7, Omega Protocol. Site 12, Lazarus Initiative. Each location had columns for how many people worked there and what kind of assets they were managing. The assets weren't normal. Type 7 entities, dimensional anomalies, transcendent subjects. I didn't know what any of that meant, but it didn't sound like office work. The second file showed budgets for each site. Millions of dollars for things like biological containment and psychic shielding. Whatever these places were, they weren't cheap to run. The third file was a list of employees. That's where I found my name. Not just my name, my full name, social security number, birthday, address. Everything about me. Listed under Site 19, Desert Rose, with a note that said, Latent Type 4, Monitoring Status. They'd been watching me for 8 years. The file had details about my daily routine, my clients, my personal life. They knew what coffee I drank, what websites I visited, how much money I had. There was a section called Activation Triggers, a list of things that would apparently make my latent Type 4 status become active Type 4. Certain sounds, meeting specific people, eating particular foods. At the bottom was a note. Subject shows high probability for spontaneous awakening. Recommend immediate containment upon first manifestation of abilities. I printed everything and put copies in 3 different bank safety deposit boxes. Then I looked up the coordinates for Site 19. Desert Rose was 47 miles southeast of Phoenix in empty desert. Satellite photos showed nothing but sand and rocks. But the coordinates were exact. I drove out there on Saturday with water and extra gas. The location was a dirt road leading to what looked like an old mine. Chain link fence, radiation warning signs, an empty guard shack. But the fence was new. The signs looked professional, and when I used binoculars, I saw someone moving inside the guard shack. I parked a mile away and hiked to a hill where I could see the whole place. What I saw made me understand why they'd been watching me. The mine was fake. Behind the visible buildings was a much bigger complex built underground. Trucks moving between buildings you couldn't see from the road. Guards in military uniforms patrolling the area. And something else. Something wrong with the air above the facility. Not wrong in a way you could see exactly, but wrong in a way that hurt to look at. Like trying to focus on something that bent in directions that shouldn't exist. I'd never seen anything like it before, but somehow, I knew what it was. That scared me more than the surveillance files. I packed up and drove home without stopping. That night, I called Father Kowalski. "The woman who hired me," I said. "What did she really want?" "I don't know what you mean, Kelly." "The drives weren't from a fire. Someone tried to destroy them. And the data on them, it's not normal office files." Silence on the other end. "Father? Some knowledge is dangerous, Kelly. Maybe you should forget what you found. They have a file on me. They've been watching me for 8 years. More silence. "Father, what's a type 4? The line went dead. I tried calling back. The number was disconnected. The next morning, Ms. Patterson was waiting outside my shop when I arrived for work. She wasn't alone. 2 men in dark suits stood next to a black SUV with tinted windows. "Ms. Brennan," she said, "we need to talk." "About what?" "About the files you found, and about what happens next." I looked at the 2 men. They had the build and stance of people who solved problems with violence. "What happens if I say no?" "Then we discuss this somewhere less public." I unlocked my shop and let them in. Ms. Patterson sat in my client chair while the 2 men positioned themselves by the windows. "The files you recovered contain classified information," she said. "Information that could endanger ongoing operations if it became public." "What kind of operations?" "The kind that keep the world safe from things most people don't know exist. Things like Type 4 entities?" Her expression didn't change. "You read your file." "Hard not to when my name's on it." "Then you know we've been monitoring you, for good reason." "What reason?" "Because you're not entirely human, Kelly, and we need to know when you're going to figure that out." I stared at her. "What?" "Your mother wasn't who you think she was. Your father wasn't entirely human either. You're what we call a latent Type 4, a person with supernatural abilities that haven't manifested yet." "That's insane." "Is it? Haven't you always been unusually good with technology? Haven't you always been able to fix things other people couldn't? Haven't you always known things you shouldn't know?" I thought about the air above the desert facility. How I'd known what it was without understanding how I knew. "What do you want from me?" "Cooperation. We'll continue monitoring you. When your abilities manifest, we'll help you learn to control them. In exchange, you occasionally assist with technical work for our organization. And if I refuse, then we discuss containment options." I looked at the 2 men by the windows. They weren't there for discussion. "What kind of technical work?" "Data recovery, computer forensics, occasionally more specialized tasks that require your particular talents." "How do you know I have particular talents?" "Because you just recovered data from drives that our best technicians said were completely destroyed, and because you found files that were encrypted with security measures that should have taken you months to break." I thought about that. The encryption had seemed surprisingly easy to crack, like the passwords had suggested themselves. What's Site 19 really for? Containing entities that pose a threat to public safety, things that fall through cracks in reality, people whose abilities have developed beyond safe limits. People like me, people like what you might become. Ms. Patterson stood up. You have 48 hours to decide, cooperation or containment. Either way, this conversation stays private. They left. I locked the door behind them and sat in my shop thinking about 8 years of surveillance and files that mentioned my parents weren't who I thought they were. That night, I drove back to the desert facility. This time, I didn't stop at the ridge. I drove right up to the gate. The guard at the gate looked like he'd been expecting me. "Kelly Brennan," he said before I could introduce myself. "Please park and come with me." No questions about why I was there. No security checks. He just walked me through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" and down a hallway that smelled like disinfectant and something else. Something organic and wrong. "Dr. Walsh will see you now," the guard said, stopping at an office door. Dr. Walsh was a woman in her 40s with gray hair and tired eyes. Her office was normal except for the monitors showing security feeds from around the facility. On one screen, I could see people in white coats moving between buildings. On another, something large and dark paced in what looked like a concrete cell. "Sit down, Kelly. We have a lot to discuss." "How did you know I was coming?" "We've been monitoring you for 8 years. We know your patterns. When people learn the truth about themselves, they usually want to see what we do here." "What do you do here?" Dr. Walsh pointed to one of the monitors. "We contain things that don't belong in the normal world. Things that could hurt people if they were left alone. Things like me? Potentially, though you're not there yet." She pulled out a thick file with my name on it, much thicker than what I'd found on the damaged hard drives. "Your mother was Rebecca Brennan, born in Tucson in 1967. Except there's no record of anyone named Rebecca Brennan being born in Tucson that year. Your father was listed as Michael Jack on your birth certificate, but no one named Michael Jack lived at the address listed." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your parents weren't human, at least not entirely." Dr. Walsh opened the file and showed me photographs. A woman who looked exactly like the mother I remembered, standing next to a man I'd never seen before. They were in what looked like a laboratory, wearing white coats and working with equipment I didn't recognize. "This is your mother. Her real name was Subject 247. She was a Type 6 entity who escaped containment at Site 12 in 1991. She assumed human identity and integrated into normal society." I stared at the photos. My mother worked at a bank. She worked at a bank for 6 years. Before that, she was a research subject at one of our facilities. Her abilities manifested when she was 17. Reality manipulation on a localized scale. She could make things appear or disappear within a limited area. That's impossible. Is it? Have you never lost something that you were certain was in a specific place, then found it somewhere completely different? Have you never had technology work for you when it wouldn't work for anyone else? I thought about all the times I'd fixed computers that other technicians said were unfixable. All the times I'd found data that shouldn't have existed. What happened to her? She died when you were 12. Car accident, according to public records. Actually, she was terminated when she began manifesting abilities that posed a threat to public safety. The room felt cold. You killed my mother. Your mother killed 17 people during a reality distortion event at a shopping mall. She was trying to create a safe space for you and accidentally erased a section of the building along with everyone inside it. Dr. Walsh showed me another photograph, a shopping mall with a perfect circular hole cut out of the center, not collapsed or burned, just gone, like someone had used a cookie cutter on reality. She panicked when she realized what she'd done. The distortion effect began spreading. We had to stop it before it reached residential areas. And my father? We don't know. He disappeared the same day your mother was terminated. We've been looking for him for 14 years. I felt sick. What am I? You're their daughter, which means you inherited genetic material from both parents. Your mother's reality manipulation abilities and whatever your father contributed. You don't know what my father was? We know he wasn't human. Beyond that, his abilities were never documented. He was careful to avoid detection. Dr. Walsh closed the file. The question now is what we do with you. Ms. Patterson said I could cooperate or be contained. That's one option, but there's a third possibility you might find more appealing. What? Join our research program voluntarily. Help us understand your abilities as they develop. In exchange, you get answers about your parents and protection from entities that might want to exploit your genetics. What kind of entities? Dr. Walsh pointed to another monitor. This one showed what looked like a person, except their shadow moved independently, and their reflection in the glass walls showed something with too many arms. Things that feed on supernatural energy. Things that reproduce by possessing people with latent abilities. Things that would see you as either a meal or a host body. I watched the shadow thing pace around its cell. How many facilities like this exist? 37 active sites worldwide. Each one houses between 50 and 300 entities that pose various levels of threat to public safety, all run by the Vatican. The Vatican provides funding and administrative oversight, but the actual work is done by an international coalition of religious and scientific organizations. Why the Vatican? Because they have experience dealing with supernatural entities, and because they have resources that governments can't access. Dr. Walsh stood up and walked to the window. Outside, I could see more of the underground complex. Buildings connected by covered walkways, vehicles moving between facilities, people in hazmat suits carrying equipment. Your abilities are going to manifest, Kelly. That's not a question. The question is whether they manifest in a controlled environment where we can help you learn to use them safely, or whether they manifest spontaneously in a public place where you might hurt innocent people. Like my mother did. Like your mother did. I thought about the shopping mall photo. 17 people dead because someone with good intentions lost control of abilities they didn't understand. What would joining the research program involve? Living on site, regular testing to monitor your development, training sessions to help you control emerging abilities, and occasionally field work. What kind of field work? Recovery operations. When entities escape containment or when new entities are discovered, we need people with supernatural abilities to help recapture them. People like me hunt people like me. People with controlled abilities help us contain people with uncontrolled abilities. It's the difference between someone who understands their power and someone who's being consumed by it. Dr. Walsh showed me another photo. A man standing in the middle of what used to be a city block. Everything around him was twisted into impossible shapes. Buildings bent into spirals. Cars fused with street signs. This is what happens when a Type 4 reality manipulator loses control completely. Chicago 2019. We had to evacuate 6 square blocks and tell the media it was a gas leak explosion. What happened to him? Termination. There was no other option. I stared at the photo. Is that what I'll become? Not if you let us help you. Dr. Walsh sat back down. I know this is a lot to process, but you don't have much time to decide. Based on our monitoring, your abilities are already beginning to manifest. The fact that you recovered data from those drives, the fact that you knew something was wrong with the air above this facility, those are early signs. How long do I have? Days, maybe weeks. Once the process starts, it accelerates quickly. And if I say no, then we monitor you until your abilities manifest uncontrollably, and then we contain you, either here or at one of the other facilities. I looked at the monitors showing the various entities in containment. People who had once been normal, who had discovered they weren't entirely human, who had lost control of abilities they didn't understand. Can I see the rest of the facility? If you're seriously considering joining the program. Dr. Walsh led me out of her office and down a series of corridors lined with thick metal doors. Each door had a small window and a placard with a number and classification. Cell 47, Type 3 Psychokinetic. Cell 48, Type 5 Temporal Anomaly. Cell 49, Type 2 Shapeshifter. How many people are here? Currently, 137 entities in various stages of containment and research. We stopped at Cell 51. Through the window, I could see what looked like a normal woman in her 20s sitting on a bed and reading a book. What did she do? Emma was a college student who discovered she could communicate with deceased people. Seemed harmless until she started channeling entities that weren't actually human spirits. What kind of entities? Things that pretend to be dead people in order to gain access to the living world. Emma unknowingly served as a gateway for 17 separate incursions before we contained her. What happens to her now? She participates in research to help us understand how her abilities work. In exchange, she receives education, medical care, and protection from the entities that would exploit her if she were released. We continued down the corridor. Cell 52 contained a man who appeared to be sleeping, except his body flickered in and out of existence every few seconds. Phase shifting, Dr. Walsh explained. He exists partially in this dimension and partially in another. We're studying his condition to develop better containment methods for similar cases. Cell 53 was empty except for scorch marks on the walls. What happened here? Spontaneous combustion event. The subject was a pyrokinetic who lost control during a stress episode. We managed to contain the fire, but not in time to save him. I felt a chill. Do many of them die here? Some. Usually from complications related to their abilities rather than from our research methods. But yes, sometimes containment isn't enough to keep them alive. We reached the end of the corridor and took an elevator down another level. This area felt different, quieter, with thicker doors and more security cameras. High-risk containment, Dr. Walsh said. Entities whose abilities pose immediate threats to facility security. She stopped at a door marked Cell 23, Type 9 Entity, Extreme Caution. Don't look directly at the subject, she warned before opening the viewing slot. Inside was something that might have once been human, but definitely wasn't anymore. It sat in the center of the cell, surrounded by what looked like floating geometric shapes that hurt to focus on. What is it? We think it was a mathematician who discovered equations that described the structure of reality itself. The knowledge changed him into something that exists partially outside normal space-time. I looked away from the viewing slot. How do you contain something like that? Very carefully, and with equipment that costs more than most people make in a lifetime. We took the elevator back up to Dr. Walsh's office. I sat in her chair and tried to process everything I'd seen. The people in those cells, I said, they were all normal once? Most of them. Some were born with abilities, but many developed them later in life. Usually triggered by stress, trauma, or exposure to other supernatural entities. What triggers it? Different things for different people. For your mother, it was fear for your safety. For others, it might be grief, anger, or even intense curiosity about the nature of reality. What about me? For you, it might be the knowledge you've already gained. Sometimes learning the truth about supernatural reality is enough to trigger latent abilities. I thought about the drives I'd recovered, the files I'd read, the facility I was sitting in. You're saying that finding out about this might be what causes my abilities to manifest. It's possible, which is why we need to make a decision quickly. Dr. Walsh pulled out a tablet and showed me a form. Voluntary Research Participation Agreement. If you sign this, you become a resident researcher, rather than a contained subject. You keep most of your freedom, but you agree to live on site and participate in regular testing. What's the difference between a resident researcher and a contained subject? Resident researchers can leave the facility with supervision. They can communicate with the outside world under monitoring. They receive compensation for their participation and have input into their research schedules. And contained subjects? Contained subjects are housed for public safety reasons. They have limited freedom and limited contact with the outside world. I looked at the form. It was surprisingly detailed, covering everything from living arrangements to research protocols to what would happen if my abilities became too dangerous to manage. What if I sign this and then change my mind? Then we discuss modification of your status. But Kelly, you need to understand something. Once your abilities manifest, there's no going back to a normal life. The question is whether you want to face that change with support or alone. I thought about my mother's shopping mall. 17 people dead because someone with good intentions lost control. If I sign this, will you tell me more about my father? We'll share everything we know, and we'll help you search for him if you want. He could still be alive? It's possible. People with his apparent level of ability are hard to kill and harder to find. I picked up the pen. What happens if I develop abilities that are too dangerous to control? Then we work together to find ways to manage them. But Kelly, the people in those cells aren't there because they were evil. They're there because they were alone when their abilities manifested and no one helped them learn control. I signed the form. "Welcome to Site 19, Dr. Walsh said. "Let's go get you settled in." My room at Site 19 was nicer than my apartment in Phoenix. Real furniture, fast internet, a mini fridge stocked with decent food. The only difference was the lock on the outside of the door and the camera in the corner. "For your safety and ours," Dr. Walsh had explained, "until we understand how your abilities manifest." That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I'd been through more tests than a NASA astronaut. Blood draws, brain scans, psychological evaluations, and something called resonance mapping that involved sitting in a chair surrounded by machines that hummed at frequencies that made my brain hurt. The results were apparently interesting. "Your genetic markers are unlike anything we've cataloged," Dr. Patel, the facility geneticist, told me during my weekly review. "Your mother's DNA shows typical type 6 reality manipulation indicators. But your father's contribution is completely unique." Unique how? We can identify what he wasn't. Not a standard psychic, not a shapeshifter, not a dimensional entity. But what he actually was, we have no reference point. Is that bad? It's unpredictable, which makes you unpredictable. The testing wasn't the hard part. The hard part was learning about the other sites. As a resident researcher, I had access to the facility database. Not everything. There were security levels I couldn't reach, but enough to understand the scope of what the Vatican was doing worldwide. Site 3 in Alaska housed entities that fed on thermal energy. They kept the facility at -40 degrees to limit the subject's abilities. Site 7 in Romania contained people who could manipulate gravity. Site 15 in Japan specialized in temporal anomalies, people who moved through time incorrectly. Each site had detailed files on their subjects, names, backgrounds, how their abilities had manifested, what containment methods were being used. Reading through them was like looking at a catalog of human misery. Marcus Williams, Site 8. Discovered he could heal people by touch when he was 16. Used his abilities to help at a children's hospital until he accidentally healed a child's cancer by transferring it to himself. The cancer mutated in his system and became something that could spread to others through physical contact. Contained for public safety. Lisa Rodriguez, Site 12. could communicate with plants until the plants started communicating back with information about buried bodies, hidden crimes, and things people had done in forests decades ago. She began sharing this information publicly, contained when she started predicting murders based on conversations with trees. Daniel Kim, Site 21, developed the ability to see through illusions and deceptions after a head injury, began exposing government secrets, corporate cover-ups, and personal lies of everyone around him. Contained when his compulsive truth-telling started causing social breakdown in his community. People who had tried to help. People who had tried to use their gifts responsibly. People who had lost control or become dangerous despite good intentions. "It's not their fault," Dr. Walsh said when I asked about the ethics of containment. "But abilities that seem helpful often become dangerous as they develop. Someone who can heal by touch might eventually become someone who kills by touch. Someone who can see the truth might eventually see truths that drive them insane." What about people who learn control? They become resident researchers, or field agents, or consultants who help us locate and contain new cases. Like me? Potentially, if your abilities manifest in manageable ways. My abilities manifested on a Tuesday morning while I was helping Dr. Patel analyze genetic samples from new subjects. I was looking at a blood sample under the microscope when the slide changed. Not just the image, the actual sample. The blood cells reorganized themselves into a pattern that looked almost like writing. "Dr. Patel," I said, "you need to see this." He looked through the microscope and frowned. "That's not the same sample I prepared." I looked again. The blood cells had returned to normal. It was different a second ago. They were arranged in patterns. Dr. Patel prepared a fresh slide from the same blood sample. I looked through the microscope and watched the cells slowly rearrange themselves into the same pattern. It's happening again. This time, Dr. Patel saw it too. We watched blood cells move into formation like tiny soldiers, creating symbols that neither of us recognized. "Is this your ability manifesting?" he asked. "I don't know. I'm not trying to do anything." But even as I said it, I could feel something new in my head. Like a muscle I'd never noticed before, now flexing without my permission. Dr. Patel called Dr. Walsh. Within an hour, I was in a testing room surrounded by equipment and sample materials. "Try to manipulate this," Dr. Walsh said, handing me a petri dish containing bacterial culture. I looked at the bacteria through a microscope. Without consciously trying, I could sense the individual organisms, their structure, their behavior, their basic genetic programming, and I could change it. I watched the bacteria reorganize themselves into a spiral pattern, then into geometric shapes, then into what looked like a miniature city with roads and buildings made of living organisms. "Biological manipulation," Dr. Walsh said, making notes. "Microscopic level initially, but with potential for macroscopic application." "What does that mean?" "It means you can control living things at the cellular level. Potentially, you could heal injuries, cure diseases, or modify organisms to serve specific functions." That sounds useful. "It also means you could kill someone by reorganizing their blood cells, create new diseases, or modify organisms into biological weapons." I stared at the bacterial city I'd unconsciously created. I wouldn't do that. Not intentionally, but what happens when you're angry? What happens when you're scared? What happens when you're sleeping and your subconscious mind is in control? That night, they moved me to a different room. Still comfortable, but with thicker walls and more sophisticated monitoring equipment. "For everyone's safety," Dr. Walsh explained, "until we understand the scope of your abilities." Over the next week, my abilities developed rapidly. I could manipulate bacteria, plant cells, even small insects. The control was becoming more precise, more conscious. I could make bacteria form complex structures, cause plants to grow in specific patterns, direct ants to build intricate designs. But I was also having dreams. Dreams about my father. In the dreams, he was working in a laboratory similar to Site 19, but older and more primitive. He was manipulating biological samples too, but on a much larger scale, creating new organisms, modifying existing ones, building living structures that served as both buildings and creatures. The dreams might be genetic memories, Dr. Patel suggested. Some Type 4 entities can access memories encoded in their DNA. Are they real memories? Possibly. Or they might be your subconscious mind constructing explanations for your developing abilities. The dreams became more detailed each night. I saw my father working with others like him, people who could manipulate reality in different ways. They were building something together, something huge and complex and alive, something that looked a lot like the underground complex at Site 19. Dr. Walsh, I said, during my next review session, who designed this facility? A team of architects and engineers with experience in high-security construction. But who designed the containment systems? The specific methods for housing different types of entities? She paused. Why do you ask? Because in my dreams, I see my father building something exactly like this, and I think he's still alive. Dr. Walsh closed my file. Kelly, what I'm about to tell you is classified above your current security clearance. But given your genetics and developing abilities, you're going to learn it eventually. Learn what? Your father didn't disappear 14 years ago. He's been working for us the entire time. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. What? He designed the containment systems for 17 of our 37 facilities. He's our chief biological consultant. He helps us understand entities with biological manipulation abilities. Where is he? Site 1, our primary research facility in Switzerland. Why haven't you told me this before? Because he requested that you not be contacted until your abilities fully manifested. He wanted to be sure you inherited his capabilities before revealing himself. He's been watching me? He's been monitoring your development through our surveillance reports. He knows about your mother's death, your life in Phoenix, your recruitment to this program. Dr. Walsh pulled out a tablet and showed me a video call interface. He's been waiting to speak with you. The screen connected, and I found myself looking at a man who looked exactly like the photos I'd seen of my supposed father, Michael Jack. Except this man was clearly not human. His skin had a greenish tint, his eyes were completely black, and when he moved, I could see that his fingers were longer than they should be, ending in what looked like retractable claws. "Hello, Kelly," he said. His voice sounded like my voice, but deeper and with harmonics that made my bones vibrate. "I'm sorry we couldn't meet sooner. What are you?" "I'm what humans become when they fully embrace biological manipulation abilities. Your mother could only affect reality on a surface level. But I can reshape the fundamental structure of living things, including yourself. Especially myself. I've been modifying my own biology for over 50 years, improving my capabilities, extending my lifespan, adapting to environments that would kill normal humans." I stared at him through the screen. "Are you still human?" "That depends on how you define human. I still have human memories, human emotions, human motivations. But my body and capabilities are far beyond human limitations." "Is that what I'm going to become?" "Only if you choose to. Your abilities are developing along similar lines to mine, but you can stop the process at any point you want." "What if I don't want to stop?" "Then eventually, you'll be able to do things that most people would consider impossible. Reshape living organisms, create new forms of life, modify your own biology to survive in any environment. But I won't be human anymore. You'll be something better than human, but you'll also be something that most humans will fear and want to contain." I thought about the other entities I'd seen at Site 19. people who had developed abilities and lost their humanity in the process. Why do you work for them? Because the alternative is chaos. Without organized containment and research, people with our abilities would either hide in fear or abuse their power without restraint. This program gives us purpose and protects normal humans from entities who might hurt them. What about freedom? Freedom to do what? Reshape the world according to our personal desires? Freedom for people like us means potential disaster for people like them. My father leaned closer to the camera. Kelly, you have a choice to make. You can limit your abilities to safe levels and live as a contained human. Or you can embrace full development and become something beyond human limitations. What do you recommend? I recommend you see what you're capable of before deciding. Dr. Walsh can arrange for you to visit Site 1. See what I've built here. Understand what's possible when biological manipulation abilities are fully developed. The call ended. I sat in Dr. Walsh's office trying to process everything I'd learned. When can I visit Site 1? I asked. Next week. But Kelly, you need to understand something. If you choose full development of your abilities, there's no going back. You'll become something that can't live in normal human society. Like my father. Like your father. Powerful, but permanently isolated from the normal world. What about people who choose limited development? They live comfortable lives in facilities like this one. They use their abilities to help with research and containment operations, but they remain essentially human. I thought about my room with the lock on the outside. Comfortable imprisonment. Protected purpose. It's not the same thing. That night, I dreamed about my father again. But this time, I also dreamed about my mother. In the dream, they were arguing about something. She wanted to leave, to live normally with me. He wanted to stay, to continue developing his abilities. In the dream, I saw what happened at the shopping mall. My mother hadn't lost control accidentally. She'd been trying to create a pocket dimension where we could live safely, away from the surveillance and containment programs. The reality distortion had been deliberate. The 17 deaths had been an acceptable price for our freedom. I woke up understanding that my parents weren't just victims of their abilities. They had been willing to kill innocent people to protect their family. And I was their daughter. A week later, I made my choice. I called Dr. Walsh into my room and handed her a signed form. Voluntary containment request, I said. I want to stay at Site 19 as a contained subject, not a resident researcher. She looked confused. Why? Your abilities are developing well. You could have significant freedom as a researcher. Because I've been reading the files, because I know what happened to my mother, because I understand what I could become if I keep developing these abilities. Kelly, you don't have to limit yourself. Yes, I do. My mother killed 17 people trying to create a safe space. My father helped design prisons for people like us. I'm not going to become someone who thinks other people's lives matter less than my freedom. Dr. Walsh sat down. Are you sure about this? I'm sure. I want my abilities suppressed to safe levels. I want to stay here and help with research, but as someone who can't hurt people, not as someone who chooses not to. The suppression process is permanent. Good. They moved me to a regular containment cell the next day, comfortable but secure. I work in the lab helping Dr. Patel with genetic analysis. My abilities are limited to manipulating bacteria in petri dishes, useful for research, harmless to people. I never went to Switzerland. I never met my father in person. I told Dr. Walsh to inform him that I chose a different path. 6 months later, I got a message from him. Just 2 words. I understand. I've been at Site 19 for 2 years now. I help analyze new subjects, assist with research projects, and occasionally provide technical support for other facilities. It's good work, important work. Last week, they brought in a new subject, a college student who discovered she could manipulate electronic devices with her mind. She was scared, angry, convinced that containment was a violation of her rights. "They're treating us like prisoners," she said during her intake interview. "They're treating us like people who could accidentally kill our neighbors," I replied. "There's a difference. Don't you want freedom?" I thought about my mother's shopping mall, about the 17 people who died because someone with good intentions lost control. "I want to sleep at night, knowing I haven't hurt anyone," I said. "That's freedom enough for me." She's adapting well to containment. Her abilities are being suppressed to safe levels. She'll probably become a resident researcher in a few months. I still have access to the database. Still read about the other sites, the other subjects, the ongoing work to keep dangerous entities contained safely. It's not a perfect system, but it's better than the alternative. And sometimes choosing limitations is the most human thing you can do.